Hi. Actually, do you mind if I take a selfie first? Let me just do this. I can show it to my kids. They didn't believe me. There we go. Right. Okay, it's the first week back. The long, sleepy haze of the summer holiday is still lingering in the air. And the office, well, it's a ghost town. It's just you, the hum of the air conditioning, and a stack of emails you've been avoiding. Suddenly, a sharp ping sounds. You look at your monitor as a notification glow hits your face. Then Teams lights up. It's the product owner. They've been busy while the rest of the world was at the beach. They tell you they have something to show you. Something different. They share their screen. And there it is, a new application. It's beautiful, it's fast, it's complete, and they claim they didn't write a single line of traditional code to build it. They've been vibe coding an entire prototype into existence using nothing but natural language and raw intent. But as a developer, as an engineer, you're left with a chilling question. How do we bring this back into our reality? How do we connect this AI-generated vision to the rigorous, codified design system we've spent years building? The PO has handed us a miracle, but they've also handed us a puzzle. To solve it, we need a way to bridge the gap between the vibe and the spec. We need a protocol that can navigate both worlds at once. I'm Stephen White, and today we're going to be investigating the Figma Model Context Protocol. So first of all, let's have a look at the vibe result. Oops. And when we look at this, we're not actually alone. Or I wasn't alone in this. Y Combinator from March 2025 indicated that approximately 25% of startup companies in their recent batches had code bases that were 95% AI generated. It's becoming the default strategy for early stage validation. For non-technical CEOs, vibe coding is the new no code. It kind of allows you to skip wireframes and move directly to functional, clickable prototypes. You can show and not tell, which is really kind of interesting and scary a bit. So let's just have a quick look at this. This is something called Figma Make, which is a tool that Figma give you to be able to pretty much vibe code your design or your application. So you have a prompt on the left-hand side of your screen or the right-hand side of your screen. And in the prompt, I'm just saying, okay, create me a login card with orange border and some input fields and then a big button, and use orange as like the primary color. So, it looks great. This is what Figma Make has done. It looks great. It even has state on it, so we can click on an input field and you get the border changing. But if we take a look at the code actually looks pretty good as well, to be honest. But you'll notice that there's no semantic kind of HTML going on. There's loads of divs, which gets us into the danger of div soup. And then also everything's kind of pretty much hard-coded. But, it works, it's great, it's very good. The problem is that the project that I'm in, or the product that we're doing, is a React Native application. And this is web. So this won't work, basically. Or with a bit of adjusting, we can get it to work. But in principle, it doesn't really adhere to our code standard that we have. So let's see what this looks like when we connect up the MCP. So I'm going to jump to the end, and then I'm going to walk us through how we get here, basically. So in this example, again, we have Figma. You can see that we're using variables for things like spacing, paddings, and this is the card that we want to create. So we selected that card, came back out into Claude. I'm using Claude in this sense. Give it a prompt. Please create this card from the selection that we had in Figma. So it will go off, query Figma, get the design context that we need, And eventually, it will turn what we see here on the right-hand side into something that adheres to our design system. Because as you can see, this is using a completely different font. It's got an orange border and everything, so it kind of looks okay. And you can see as it's going through, it's actually found a bunch of components that we already have, and it's going to try and reuse those. So bingo, all of a sudden we get the card that comes up. And you can see that this is Storybook. Storybook's like a way of kind of visually testing your UI components, I guess you could say. And where do we get to? Okay, so here we go. I mean, like, it gives you a lot of information about what it's done. It's using design tokens. It's using, like surface default, border action, and it's using a bunch of components that we already had, which is great. But the problem is, well, sorry, let's just quickly go back here. So you can see it's using a lot of the components that we already have. So with vibe coding, there's a certain kind of cardboard structure or cardboard foundations that you get with your code. And just with a simple refactor, the whole thing can fall apart, basically. And also, when you are refactoring or when you're looking at that code, it's a bit of a mess, and the poor developer has to look with his spyglass to try and work out what the hell's going on in that code. So you get broken vibes and you end up with a bit of a graveyard feeling at the end of it. Maybe you end up with something fast, but in the long run, it takes quite a lot of time to actually make it into something that's production ready. The other thing is that we want some kind of return of investment. We've just spent all of this time building this component library, which is according to our design system, and we want to reuse it. So here we have Finn and Jake looking out over the sea of complexity. It looks beautiful, but in the depths, there's lots of dark mysteries lurking in the depths. So we want to help Finn and Jake on this epic journey that they're about to embark on. But before we do that, I need to just quickly go over a bit of taxonomy and explain a few words, which I'll probably end up using throughout the presentation, and some of you might be thinking, what are you talking about? So anyway, first up, design system. If you're not aware what a design system is, it gives you the building blocks for efficient design-informed product development. It gives you a comprehensive living set of reusable components, standards, and guidelines that help teams build consistent, scalable, and high-quality digital products efficiently, and also it makes you adhere to a particular brand. So it's kind of crucial in your organization. The other word I'm going to use a lot is Figma. If you don't know what Figma is a collaborative cloud-based design tool for creating user interfaces for websites and apps, offering features for UI design, prototyping, developer handoff, etc., etc. It's a design tool that is pretty standard, I would say, in the industry just now. And then we have the MCP. MCP is an open source standard for how different AI agents and applications talk to one another or to other external systems. So we have a bunch of external systems here, like GitHub or Figma or even Tamaguri, which is what I'm going to get to in a sec. The MCP sits here, and then it kind of like informs the agent about this context. So when you ask the agent to do something, it will use this context in what it creates or what it gives you. And then finally, you have your code that is generated over to the left there. I'll mention Tamaguri. It's one of my favorite libraries, but obviously there's tons of different libraries out there, so don't get too hung up on this, but I'm using this in the examples that we're going to go through. But basically, it's a UI library, a universal UI library that allows you to build universal apps. So that's for web, iOS, and Android, and whatever else, actually. But basically, it kind of abstracts away the primitives of div and view, for example. If it's web, we'll use a div. If it's not, we'll use a view, which is a React Native primitive. Okay, so enough of that. Let's get back. So getting back to the example I showed previously, How do we make Jake and Finn's life easier? Well, the first thing that we need to do is have a look at context. It's all about the context. So without context, all we have is a prompt, which we give to Figma Make or Lovable or whatever. Build me an app that looks amazing, and it will give you a bunch of code and will give you something that works that you can use. But there's no real kind of code context there. So, when you're using these things, you want it to be able to introspect what you have in your code. So we provide it with a code-based context. So the agent is basically going through your code, and whenever you ask it to do something, it will look at what's going on in your code base and say, okay, well, is this kind of what you want? Based on what it already sees in your code base. But then on top of that, we can give it a design context as well, which is what the MCP server does, or the Figma MCP-server does. It doesn't just have to be a design context. It could be whatever other context you want for your MCP server. But in our case, it's this design context that we need. So, basically, this allows the LLM to access what's designed, to see what's designed, and then base its code choices on that. So let's see how you do this. So we're back in Figma, and in the main menu bar on the right, there's a new little section called MCP, and you basically just enable that. And then once you've enabled that, you can go to Claude or whatever agent you're using, and then you can just add the MCP into Claude or whatever you're using. Excuse me. In Cursor, it's actually a lot easier. You've just got to drop down and you can see the MCPs that are available. And then you can do like a MCP list to be able to see what MCPs you currently have. In most kind of agentic-driven development, maybe you'd just have a huge list of MCPs because you want to bring in contexts from all over the place. But in our case, we just have the MCP here. And then going back over here, one of the nice features, actually, with Figma is that you can see how many tokens it's going to take to be able to build something. So when you've selected something in Figma, it will give you a rough guesstimation as to how many tokens it will take. So, if you're on a budget, obviously you want this to be as small as possible. And one way to do that is to use something called Figma Code Connect. So you can actually, paste in or even hook Figma up to your GitHub repository so that you can have the code snippets that match the particular component that you have there. But it costs a fortune, so I'm not going to demo it because I didn't have enough money to buy the license. Sorry. But if you're in a big organization, please use it because it's great. It's very good. Anyway, moving on. So how do we create this design context? How do we get Figma into our code base? Let's have a look. The first thing is that we have our design system, or we have the primitives of our design system. And these are things like colors, spacing, typography, basically all the kind of small little bits, the atoms. I use the word atoms here. All the atoms of your design system. And you need to be able to make this codifiable. And one of the really cool features in Figma is that you have variables. So you can create variables from all of these things. So we start off with the primitives, so the raw color, if you like. And then we can move on to semantic naming. So we can bring those colors into much more of we can give it meaning, we can make it semantic, if you like. And on top of that, we can start using those semantic names in our components. And, so the design system kind of grows gradually, from atoms, molecules to organisms, as what we see here. And because everything's kind of coming from variables, if we really want to, we can change a variable to anything we want. And we can change it to pink or whatever. And this will just kind of seep through everywhere in your design system without you having to kind of click around each one of these boxes and change the color. Everything just changes automatically. So, this is a kind of interesting step for designers, because designers love working in the infinite canvas that we have in Figma. But, we're kind of bringing them more into thinking about code, thinking about variables. So, where does the source of truth live? Now, a design system that only lives in Figma is like a map without a road. It shows you the destination, but it doesn't really give you the means to get there. So codification is the process of turning that map into the actual infrastructure and providing a route to your destination. So we want to take those variables and create design tokens that we can use in our code base. So we have the Figma guys and girls on the left, and we have the coders on the right. Traditionally, they would just kind of sit there. There'd be a big wall in between them, and they would just chuck over their designs. And then sometime in the future, they'd have a meeting, and they'd go, "No, that pixel's not right," or "The color's slightly off," or "What the hell are you doing here? This looks rubbish," whatever. And this process would just go backwards and forwards, But if you're breaking down these barriers and using things like design tokens, you can live quite harmoniously with your designers and everyone's happy, kind of thing, hopefully. So, and there's one truth as well, and that one truth is coming from Figma. Okay, so how do we do this? How do we create these design tokens? Atoms to code. So the first thing is that I'm using a plugin called Design Tokens. You can actually use you can use Figma APIs. Figma has a whole bunch of open APIs, or you need an access token. So you can do this directly. And actually, in the project I'm in, we're actually doing this directly. So we have this hooked into our CI/CD pipeline where we get the tokens. But I'm just doing this manually here. So we can export those tokens, and it gives us a kind of really bizarre JSON file, which is difficult to read. But from this JSON file, we can do some Claude magic, and we can turn it into something that's vaguely readable for coders. So, we can begin to, organize our colors, for example. We've got these neutral colors going on here. And this kind of, if you think about the Figma designs we saw earlier, this relates back to those colors. And then from there, you can start using those design tokens in your theme. So here I'm using a Tamagui theme. It could be a Material UI theme, it could be whatever you want. And you can begin to map this stuff to your code. So we've exported the tokens, rearranged them a bit, and then we've mapped them into our theme. So then finally, we can start seeing that we use these tokens in the components that we create. So, for instance, with this link text component, you can see we're using title condensed, and then up there in Figma, it's the same name. So there's this mapping between the design tokens and what we have in Figma in our code, which is pretty amazing. So molecules to code. So we've got the primitives, but now we want to bring over something a bit richer, like this button, for example. And again, you select your button, go to Claude, say, please create this button with my selection, and bingo, it will create it. And the interesting thing here is that because it's aware that you're using Tamagui, you can see that the variants match what we have in the button as well. There's two variants here. There's the active state and then there's the disabled state. And then this is kind of mapped over here, and you can see we're using those design tokens as well. So this is awesome. And we can go even further. So we can start doing all of the other components that we have in Figma and in our design system. And then we can move on to organisms. So we're going from atoms, molecules, organisms, and organisms are much richer components, like a card, for example, this information card, or even the schedule card that we have up there. And all of these are like components in Figma. So you have properties, you can adjust the properties, and you can see all this kind of stuff in real time. And then you can just export it into your code base. So then finally, Princess Bubblegum's really happy with all these components that are raining down from Unicorn. And this is great, and all the developers are happy and everyone's happy because we're just getting the stuff, using it, and knocking out great UI code, which is great. So we're going to go back to the beginning a bit here. So we're going to have a look at organisms to code. So again, we're back in Figma. We select something. So we select the schedule card here. We come back to Claude and we say, please create the schedule card. And it goes through. And again, you can see that it's picking up a bunch of the components that we've already created. And hopefully Storybook will update in a sec. No, I need to press another button. Okay, sorry. And Claude gives you a couple of examples of how to use the component, and then we can see the component directly in Storybook. So we've just gone straight from Figma directly into our code base, and then we can see it in Storybook. So this process is pretty amazing, and to be honest, this would normally take quite a lot of time, from the handoff to the developer, and then testing and all this kind of stuff. Behind the scenes, there's also unit testing that's been, or unit tests that have been created. So, there is another aspect, and this is about tightening the context. So we've seen how the MCP communicates and how that works, but then also within Claude, or whatever you're using, you have these things called rules, which basically tell Claude directly what it should do. And if you think back to those tokens that Figma was showing you earlier, if you set up a really good set of rules, it means that Claude won't go out to Figma, it will just adhere to those rules that you have here. So for example here, we've got critical rules, and you can see that never hard code color values, never hard code font sizes, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, traditionally you'd put this in like linting, or it would come up in a PR review where you'd have another developer saying, what the hell have you done here? What's this 7 doing here for a margin or something? And you can do this with Claude, right when the code's being generated. And we say always use Tamaguri theme tokens, always use configured font families, et cetera, et cetera. And these rules can just go on, and they can be in separate MD files, so you can go crazy, basically, in restricting how you do stuff, which sometimes you need to do that. Actually, most of the time you need to do that. So if we just have a quick look through here. There's a pre-commit checklist, which is interesting. Okay, so let's continue. So some conclusions. The first one is that context is king. You need to be able to get that context into your agent or into your LLM, so your LLM can use it. We want to be able to set agentic rules to make that even tighter. And one of the things is that the tighter the Figma connection, the better the return on investment. So if you already have, I've shown you where you can create these components directly from Figma, but if you've already invested in a codified design system, you still have the ability to be able to reuse that by tweaking Figma and by tweaking the rules. And then also, it's really, really important that you get the design tokens. And the design tokens are almost like the API. So, front end to back end, the API or the schema that you're using, or the REST interfaces that you're using, the open API interfaces that you're using, are the kind of source of truth between you, the front end and the back end. And from a design perspective, the source of truth are these design tokens and also the designs, obviously. So it's really important that you have that mindset, and also the designers have that mindset. You know, so you don't guess, basically. But, you know, one of the issues is that we can now create code at light speed. You know, we can create code faster than we've ever been able to create code. But the thing is that we create that code within a context or within an environment, and that environment is obviously the organization. It's the processes that surround us. So it's great to be able to create code really fast, but to be able to do it in a way that where we can release the stuff, the organization needs to rethink itself. You know, the regulations, the red tape, the policies, waiting for approval. So it's almost like, okay, this is great from a developer perspective, but from an organizational process perspective, they need to get on board with the way that this is working as well. You know, it could mean, you know, speeding up the whole test cycle or whatever, but it's really, really important that that happens. So, we're moving from a world where the AI guesses what we want to a world where it has full visibility of our records. It's no longer working from a memory, it's working from the evidence. When the PO says make it look like our brand, the MCP ensures the AI isn't just dreaming, it looks at the manual. So where does that leave us? For a long time, the gap between the designer and reality was a space filled with manual handovers, throwing over. Lost context and endless interpretation. We've spent our careers trying to build a bridge across that void one ticket at a time. But as we've seen today, the model context protocol changes the nature of the investigation. It's no longer about whether an AI can understand a design, it's about how we choose to use that understanding, And we've kind of opened the door into our Figma files that we can't really close again. The data's flowing, the context is being shared, and the barrier is thinning. And hopefully we can start vibe coding responsibly. So is this the end of the designer-developer divide as we know it? Perhaps not entirely, but we've found a new way to look at the problem, and in this industry, a new perspective is often the most powerful tool we have. I'm Stephen White, and thank you for joining me on this quest into the Figma MCP.
Så ja. Tack Steven, inspirerande som alltid. Man vill ju bli frontändare när man, efter varje föredrag. Men. Jag har några frågor, jag tar dem uppifrån och ner. Okay. Efter antal röster. Är design tokens en standard eller en specifikation eller bara ett koncept?
It's more of a concept really, I guess. It's I'm not sure if it's become a standard really, but it's something we always use. We always say design tokens. But I'm not really sure it's a standard. It's much more of a concept. Yeah.
Nästa på engelska. Does this mean designers can design and wipe code? That is shift left in the process, maybe leveraging developers for final code review, or are developer hand-holding AI still needed?
Well, I'm a developer, so I really want to be around still. But there is a bit of a shift left. But I think it's all to do with long-term maintainability. You know, I mean, whatever you code quickly, you want that to have longevity. So I think that definitely the developers need to be there to bring sanity to that code base, I would say, personally.
Nästa, borde man inte kunna få designers att lagra sitt designarbete som kod i ett versionssystem som source of truth och tänka på branch emerging work etc. Figma borde läsa skriva direkt till Git.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, it kind of does. There's branching mechanisms in Figma. I'm not sure you actually can push it to Git, but it's all within Figma at the moment. So there is a way of versioning that stuff. Yeah.
Ja, vi har ett par till, jag tror vi hinner. Hur är det med versionshantering av resultatet? Det är väl ungefär samma som tidigare där. Ja, det är om man kan versionshantera Figma-filer i Git. Och det,
Yeah,
ja.
yeah, pretty much.
Sista här då. Could you elaborate a bit more on the topic of vibe coding and process master? What challenges and possible solutions do you see?
Oh, maybe. Well, I mean, I can only say my personal opinions on this, really. To be honest, vibe coding is not going to go away. You know, there's what I mentioned earlier with this Y Combinator thing. Most startups will probably vibe code something. And to be honest, maybe it's a bit old school for me to say, oh, what about longevity? What about, you know, quality of code and stuff? They will probably just say, well, we just throw the code base away and we just recreate it again. You know, so that's one thing that scares me a lot. But, you know, you don't know how good... At the moment, vibe coding is not super good at kind of updating the code base it's already created. It's really good at just recreating it, I think. But that process is probably going to get better. So I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ja, tack så mycket.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.